Whereas if you have a, I don't know what that was, but
I don't either. Thank you. I think that answers the question, but Michael, if you wanted to, if there's a follow-up question.
yeah, it's a very vigorous plant, and so it competes well, and it definitely produces some allelopathic compounds, and what role those play versus other forms of competition, and rye being a dominant crop during its time period is a little bit unclear.
Thanks.
Yeah, so again, with the wheat and triticale, you want to try and plant them, I would say, by the end of October. It wouldn't go into the, if you're into the early November, it's to just do rye. And there probably actually are varieties of triticale that are as hardy as the rye. But it's also very triticale, just in case anybody, is a hybrid of wheat and rye. So it's a little bit intermediate between wheat and rye. They're all really very similar. So and so we also have Italian or annual ryegrass, which is not closely related to rye, which is, a little bit annoying. I mean, they're grass, so it's not unrelated. But it's a much smaller seed than a small grain seed than rye or wheat. But I would say it is a pretty good, pretty good option for intercropping. It is, really tolerant of traffic when it's there, and pretty nice crop. It is very fine, so it breaks down more quickly than the stems of sort of larger programs.
Is that how tall it gets, or?
I would say that's about how tall it gets before like flowering.
Okay.
Like, it's not like once it starts flowering, I would think it gets maybe 3 feet tall with the flower stems, but a lot smaller than rye. But it's quite thick in that area, so it's less biomass, but not a tiny amount of biomass still.
Okay, thanks.
And so here we didn't talk about peas in the winter kill section, because there's some peas that will overwinter and some peas that won't. Again, like buckwheat, they're pretty soft residue, so they're gonna break down pretty quickly. You definitely want to know whether you're getting winter peas or spring peas, because if you want them to winter kill, the spring peas will and the winter peas won't. And yeah, I would say they're a little bit more slow growing, pretty good for mixtures. Like a just pea field is a little bit, can have a tendency to lodge as well. It's nice for them to have something to kind of hold on to when growing upright. Yeah. Another one of our stars are hairy vetch, which I'm a bigger fan of hairy vetch than a lot of people. But I really think that if you're, if you're doing cultivation, the volunteers are manageable. Obviously, like if the volunteer vetch annoys you, then that's also totally fine. But you can really get a large amount of nitrogen, pretty easily 150 pounds of nitrogen from vetch if you let it get to flowering, which is, a lot, especially for organic farmers. It can be just like, even if the cost is not the main issue with spreading, chicken manure or whatever, it can just be too much work. And you can get a lot of that nitrogen from vetch. But you do have to wait until end of May or early June to get that when it's flowering. Some people have been able to roller crimp vetch, but I've never done it successfully. So I would be cautious doing things other than tillage to kill the vetch. And especially because you want all that nitrogen that's in the leaves, in the dirt. as well. Again, the vetch can definitely get tangled in equipment. It's something to think about and to be kind of on the lookout for if it's something that you haven't grown before and you go out there with a piece of equipment to, you know, to see if it's getting tangled up before it gets to be a really annoying thing to clean out. So lastly, I wanted to just talk about our full season cover crops, and that's mostly going to be clovers. People, there are like annual alfalfa that can work as well, although like I would say our soils are typically a little bit more acidic than alfalfa likes, and so like you have to do a little bit. The clover will be less touchy, and if you know, red clover is great if you want something big. There's big white clovers as well. There's a little bit more variation in white clovers, so you want to make sure you're getting what's called like a Ladino white clover if you want a big one, as opposed to a Dutch white clover, which is going to be pretty small and not as competitive with weeds, not as much biomass and nitrogen production. But they're both really great for if you can plant them in the fall or early spring and let them grow at least through the next summer. You can get a lot of biomass production, a lot of nitrogen. Also a big fan for bees, like the buckwheat and insects as well. So when we look at you know, mixtures, we can get kind of a lot of different benefits. So you can get some nitrogen, you can get some nutrient scavenging, you can get you know, some antifungal properties, you can get some pollinator and, you know, natural enemies, food from the flowers, all that sort of stuff. And I've touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to just go through like a common example, which is our rye and vetch again. You know, you're mostly going to kill that using tillage. So, but you're going to have to mow the rye probably if you want to get the most out of the vetch. So you have to think about, it's going to be a little bit more complicated to manage a mixture than if you grow just vetch, say, you know, but you're going to have better weed control in the fall from the rye. And, you know, the timing, even if vetch is possible to roller crimp on its own, it's pretty dicey to roller crimp with rye. So again, like, why is this all so complicated? Like, what are we trying to get out of cover crops? You know, you know, there's really, by doing cover crops well, you can get more available nitrogen, more organic matter, more soil protection, and more weed control, which are all really valuable things. But it's a big thing to think about. You know, if you get to a place where it's a fun thing to think about, then it can be really enjoyable. But I think, you know, not trying to be too rose-colored glasses or whatever. It's definitely a thing that takes some effort to get. You know, to some extent, you get out of it what you put into it. And if you, you know, there's kind of easy cover cropping where you get some benefits, but then you need to rely more on manures and compost and other amendments compared to what you can get out of the cover crops. But it takes work to get that. That's doesn't work for every field, doesn't work for every year. So when you start going into cover crops, the main things that you want to think about are, you know, what cash crops are you growing, how it's going to fit into your rotation, you know, how you're planning on planting the cover crop, and then how you're planning on killing the cover crop, and then make sure you think about how that's going to affect the fertility in terms of nitrogen, and any pest issues that are going to come up with the rotation. So I then wanted to go through, there's a couple resources here I wanted to talk about, which are online. We have our SARE Managing Cover Crops Profitably book. That's a great sort of thing to read, and then an online cover crop selection tool that I thought we could walk through one of. So I'm gonna stop sharing here. Oops. Stop sharing. And then share screen again, but this time go here. Oops. I gotta get, oops, I need to, okay. Okay, I think folks can see managing cover crops profitably here. It's entirely online. You can order a hard copy of it. I personally am a little bit more of a paper book reader, and I find this book to be the sort of thing that you can just read, and it's skim around in it, flip around. It's super fun. It's got lots of good information. I'm just gonna so show a couple of things in here. So it's got these tables in it that are really useful, where we can look at different species. Are they, how much lasting residue are they going to make? Duration, harvest value, if you want to do that. Can it be interseeded? It's going to go through not an enormous number of cover crops, but a good number of cover crops. There's going to be comments about, pest issues, whether it's, and so this is just that, that's one table got, hardiness zones, heat tolerance, drought tolerance, lots of good stuff like that. And then there's like a section about each of these crops as well to read about different stuff. But I think it's a great thing. It's, the PDF is free online, and the book is like $20 or something. It's pretty not crazy expensive. And then finally, I wanted to go through, so this is our cover crop selector tool. That's kind of a way that you can, if you have a situation that you're thinking about, a way to do that. So I thought we'd just kind of walk through this and see, folks could see how it works. We've got lots of different states. Obviously, we can choose Massachusetts. But next we can say, does anybody have does anybody have a cover crop situation they want to use as an example? Or
can use my field in Deerfield.
all right. So let's see. Oh, here we go. So we'll say Deerfield.
Yeah.
Deerfield, Massachusetts. Right.
Pretty close to there.
Yeah. It's going to tell us our zone. Oops. It actually will, let's say, how about this field, right?
That is my street. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, great.
Not my house, but close enough.
That's great. I'm not trying to dox you on this call anyways. But it is going to use the soil type where you select. So if you come in here and you're able to select like the specific soil, that's a great way. So it's going to give our soil type. It's going to have our regular frost dates, precipitation. And then you have the option to kind of, say, well, I know this is typically what it is, but actually, like, I would say this field's actually a little bit excessively. So, like, it's great to get the data from the sort of soil map, but, things might be different in the field that you're looking at than they have on the map. They're not like, the maps aren't totally accurate at a small scale. So you can change things to represent, what the real conditions of your field are. And then we can come to here. We can say, okay, we want nitrogen scavenging. We want to have lasting residue. We want to, let's say, prevent fall erosion. And then we put in our cash crop growing window. Let's just give a sort of typical summer cover crop or summer cash crop window. And we can do that. It's going to work for a little bit, and it's going to get us a bunch of different options that we can then click around on. So it'll show the cash crop season here in pink, and then different times. So it will show a bunch of information for, so not all of these, some of these, are coming up here. It's Sudan grass. Like, it's like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like a great match for our growing season. But it'll give you a lot of different ideas here of, here's nitrogen scavenging goal. So it's presenting a bunch of that stuff. We can look over here and we can sort of tailor these. We can say, okay, how important is competing summer weeds? We can say 3 and might reorder stuff and say persistence. Let's say we want something that's drought tolerant and heat tolerant. And so now it's going to kind of say, okay, of the ones that it came up initially, these are the ones that meet, these sort of sets. And then once you get the list that you like, you can click on that. Take a minute to load up here, but give us some nice pictures and kind of essentially do a similar sort of thing that the tables in managing cover crops profitably does, but in a website form where you don't have to try and like page through it. And I think the managing cover crops profitably book is pretty easy to go to, but the PDF can be a little bit annoying to scroll up and down. And this can be an easier way to sort of click around. There's going to be, different characteristics of the crops, and then some more things, references to different fact sheets. It's a really nice resource to jump into, and this is done by the Northeast Cover Crop Council, which is sort of our regional cover crops working group. That's a sort of a collaboration between different universities and service providers and farmers to come up with this sort of thing. So I'm gonna get out of here and
yeah, there were a couple of questions as we get towards the end of our time here. I can go for ones that we haven't gotten to yet, but feel free to keep adding them into the chat, and then at a certain point.
Yeah, and I'm going to put my contact info in the chat as well. And if we don't get to anything that folks were interested in today, or something comes up months or whatever from now, definitely feel free to reach out. Happy to talk.
This project, we also have some technical assistance available. So if you are feeling like you would want some more one-on-one help with this, Arthur has offered their time, and I also am available to help folks with any of the topics on sort of the list of workshops. But there was a question on integrating livestock into these cover crop plans. For example, like sheep could be, I guess, as like a terminating method. But are there other ways to think about using livestock or?
Yeah, I think, so a lot of the cover crops, basically every cover crop is good for animals to eat. There are some that you run into issues with, like Sudan grass can have some toxicity when it's young. So it's not just like everything is great all the time. But typically, there's, I would say, You know, in the fall, especially later in the fall, if you have a crop that's been established, it's totally possible to go on and say graze oats in the fall without really reducing um, your benefit from that cover crop much at all. Um, and then, you know, spring, I would say especially triticale is super popular with dairy and beef farmers as a spring feed. Small grains are really good quality feed for ruminants as a hay. Um, so I think there's a lot there. You definitely like in the spring, you definitely need to think about your reentry period with manure as far as the uh, food safety stuff goes. So you have to be, um, yeah, have to be pretty cautious about that. I think it'd be hard to graze in the spring and then still be able to harvest a crop at a regular time.
There's a question in the chat here. If I planted clover in spring rye nowish, would I then till under in May before planting cash crops? Would it be worthwhile?
Um, I would say it's probably there's going to be things that grow faster. Like I think oats and peas would be a better thing to plant soon-ish. Um, yeah, I would say I would go with something that's going to grow faster than the clover, and then um, typically rye when it's planted, at least the sort of rye varieties that are available in this area, if they're planted in the spring or summer, they won't go to seed very quickly. But that means they also won't grow that much. They kind of think it's fall again and will just kind of grow a little bit. So something like oats that are going to be, uh, you know, I think within a few weeks, we're probably going to be out of the window of having very cold temperatures. And so oats and a hardy pea are going to grow pretty well, even a spring pea, really.
There was a question about high tunnel cover crops, and I don't know if you have any experience with that. And
Yeah, I mean, high tunnel cover crops, again, this is one where you really like the termination method comes in there of like what can a lot of the equipment is not going to work in the high tunnel, and it can be a definitely can be a little bit scary to be in the high tunnel in a tractor and worry about hitting things. So at the same time, it's hard to get stuff to winter kill in a tunnel in the same way. Stuff that would winter kill outside won't winter kill in a tunnel, even if even if you leave it open, it's still a little bit more protected. And so, I would definitely lean in a tunnel towards, something that's going to be relatively easy to deal with. Like oats are, just a softer plant than rye. Something that's not going to be, you know, uh, not necessarily going to require kind of the heaviest duty like mower that you have, like something that like you can get in there like a walk behind mower and it's not going to just like totally die. So like oats and peas, I think are generally good. I think if you're doing a year-long fallow, I think clover is great. I don't know if other folks have definitely like there's probably other people on this call that have experience with stuff too, so they should jump in if
yeah,
um
we've we've done buckwheat in our
mm,
tunnel,
mhm.
and there was some paper showing that it reduced some of the damping off pathogens. So we were doing that before planting direct seeded spinach. We did kind of have to hand mow it and then try to BCS it in. And I think it took 2 passes maybe. Um, and I was at a high tunnel workshop recently, a little further south of here, and they were just really stressing that things can grow really fast in there and just a lot of biomass. So be prepared to deal with that. Yeah, think about how you're gonna terminate it before you get buried in something. But they were doing a lot of cowpeas in the tunnels, and because if you are looking at like the summer window, things that can take more heat, so you have some different options. And the cowpeas seemed like a favorite in that region.
Yeah, and I'll say if you're putting in a high tunnel, it's maybe worth measuring how tall your tractor is before you purchase like the sidewall with the door and get something that you can open up somehow that, you know, when you take the roll bar down or something, you can squeeze the tractor in there because it's a lot easier to like VCS around the edges of a high tunnel than to do the whole thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and there are tunnels that, have totally open end walls that you can drive full-size tractors through. So if you're in a situation where you want to be able to cover crop in there, or just generally use your tractor implements to make beds and whatever else, those are a good option at that scale. Any other questions from folks? You can feel free to keep popping them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask Arthur directly. We're a little over time, so.
Hi, I had a question. You had mentioned earlier that for frost seeding, like small round seeds like white clover are really what's going to work best. And I was just wondering, could you seed in like late fall or early winter just to like get the seed out there, and then you know that it's already in position for whenever that freeze thaw cycle kicks on? Or is it like, oh, the seed's going to rot, or it's going to germinate too soon but be weak and just winter kill, like the dynamic there versus trying to dance around like when it's mud season / freeze thaw season and trying to get the seed out then? Like, how critical is that time window for freeze thaw seeding? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that you're definitely going to get, more seed eaten by animals the longer that it's sort of sitting out there. But I think that that's a great idea, especially if you have like, to say, oh, it's late, I can still plant rye, but it's not really going to get any clover growth this fall. That putting clover on at that time, like there is a if you're gonna then let it, not if you can let that sit till June or July, that could be a great way to do it. I think that's a great thing to do. I think you're not going to probably get it. You're not going to get as even of a stand as if you, went through it. I'll say another thing that, another option would be to, uh, to put clover on in the spring, and then if you have like a really light tine harrow, something that's you could drag over there, if you don't have a drill or something, but you could either drill in some clover seed, or before the rye starts really getting big again in the spring, to run over that rye with the tine harrow, and the clover seed. And I think you would get better results from that than putting it on in the fall. But I think, obviously it's one note with it's fairly easy to get the little seeds too deep when you plant them with other stuff. So you just want to be a little bit, sometimes you have to do multiple seedings anyways, like unless you have like a different like small seed box on a planter. It can be pretty easy, if you're going over something to plant rye or oats, to get stuff like brassicas or clover kind of too deep and just not end up with any of that too. So, but I think you're right that putting it on in the fall is totally viable way of doing it. Somebody asked about sunflowers. Sunflowers are great. They're a great cover crop. Definitely frost sensitive. But I think you know, people do like oats and peas as a summer cover crop as well, and sunflowers go great with that. They're a little bit longer season than buckwheat. I mean, the thing with buckwheat is it's just so fast that it's like honestly kind of it's a little bit hard to mix with it because by the time the buckwheat is setting seeds, like other stuff hasn't grown that much. But yeah, sunflowers are a great cover crop. Especially if you like, they're great for birds too. But is it like, I don't know if you could use them as a trap crop for starlings or something. But,
Also,
they're
like,
great, and that's I would say sunflowers are another example of something that like can totally be a dual use
that's what I was
cover
gonna
crop.
say too.
That if you, but you know, they're not all going to look as nice as the sunflowers that you know baby in a bed, but if you have a quarter acre of sunflowers in a cover crop mix, there's going to be plenty of them there that look really, really nice and are totally saleable. We also have a question about no-till transplanters in different cover crop residues. So that's I didn't really emphasize this when we talked about the drills earlier, is that with the drill, you like even a not no-till drill, just a standard grain drill, will typically you'll be able to seed through crop residues in the fall. So you using a drill, you really shouldn't need to do any tillage after the cover crop. If it's a lot of residue, then maybe mow it. You know, if it's like tomatoes, you can mow that ahead of going through with your drill. But you can really get a nice cover crop stand without doing any sort of tillage, and you don't really even need in an annual vegetable field where the ground was tilled last spring or something, you don't really need a super heavy no-till drill. A regular drill that's not even set up for no-till will work fine. The other thing that another disadvantage of drills is that they can be a little bit harder to use in rocky soils. So one of the nice things about the broadcast is that that's going to go on kind of everywhere and go. Whereas when you are bumping on rocks, you can definitely, it's just harder on the drill, and it'll still work fine, but I would say the expense of the drill and potentially having to replace parts a little more often in a rocky soil is another issue with the drills.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions, so I think we can wrap it up here. And again, Arthur's contact info is available there. Thank you so much, Arthur. Always more to learn every time with cover crops. And that was one of the comments, is thank you for acknowledging how complicated it is to coordinate the timing of everything. And thank you all for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Great. Thanks everybody for coming. And yeah, definitely reach out if anybody wants to talk more about anything else. So
Awesome.
right.
Have a good day. See you all
Bye,
later.
everybody.
Bye-bye.